Hi, I'm Vladimir Penkrat. I'm Head of Regulatory Affairs at Indegene. I'm here to talk to you about health authority queries and how that happens as a result of regulatory submissions to global health authorities around the world. This is a very important process area that comes about as a result of those submissions by market authorization holders as they progress in their different initial submissions to those health authorities, as well as any line extensions to extend those capabilities to ensure that they're able to secure approval from those health authorities. Now, this is a very interesting topic that's come about, and we've had a great opportunity to talk about this further in Indegene's hosted Digital Regulatory Affairs Council. That council is made up of several industry leaders from across health authority companies that come together to talk about emerging topics. And health authority queries was one of these. What we did is we actually discussed some of those topics, got some understanding around what were some of the challenges associated with that, and then we issued a query, a survey out to the industry and polled several pharmaceutical companies about those experiences. As an outcome of that, we got several learnings from that. And some of that I'll just share briefly with you. Number one, the US FDA and the EMEA, as you might have expected, is very commonly issuing a lot of questions based on those applications. Now, it isn't uncommon that pharmaceutical companies submit their initial applications to those health authorities, and they do provide a lot of scrutinization to those to ensure that there's level of clarity on what's been submitted, understanding the clinical backdrop, understanding the manufacturing process, and otherwise. Secondly, what we learned from those surveys was that there were certain areas of that submission that are most commonly driving questions from health authorities. Number one, clinical. Understanding the backdrop of the clinical science, the clinical trial, and the outcomes and the insights to ensure that there was a good balance of the benefit risk of that profile of that product. Secondly, around manufacturing. Third, the label, which is representative to the patient, and ensuring that there's a level of communication. And lastly, about the safety of that product itself. We also learned that in the time of COVID, there was a lack of communication with health authorities, and that created some challenges in that level of communication. But moving forward, what we also came to understand was that the data that comes from these communications is very valuable. And organizations that are evaluating this are finding digital approaches to manage this that can drive insights for future submissions to health authorities, but that the organization is struggling to maximize the value and communicate that back. The last thing I'll mention, and then I want to introduce the panelists, is that there were four challenges associated with this. The insights that the data can provide is currently not available in many cases. Number two, the capacity of the organization to manage these health authority questions is a challenge. It is a cross-functional responsibility. However, regulatory affairs drives that to ensure that they're communicating back to those requests for clarity from those health authorities. Third, the compliance to those timelines to try and drive those communications back is limiting, and that can delay the approval of the product on the market. And lastly, on occasion, the health authorities are asking questions that require clarity and are not very clear. And that also can create a communication churn with the health authorities. At this point, I want to take a few seconds to introduce the panelists that are joining me very graciously. First, I'd like to introduce Martine Zimmerman, who's coming to us from Alexion. Hi, Martine. I think we're having a bit of a lag there. I think while we wait for Martine to join, what I'll ask then is if Paul Nichman from Intercept Pharma could join us.
Thanks, Vlad. Happy to be here, and thanks for setting this up. I'm Paul Nichman, Head of Regulatory Affairs at Intercept Pharmaceuticals. I have been in industry for about 30 years in a mix of small to very large pharma, and most of my time has been in regulatory affairs.
Great. And I'd like to ask Michael from AstraZeneca to join.
Hi, Vlad. It's Michael Flynn here from AstraZeneca. I'm Executive Director of Regulatory Affairs Management and Regulatory Transformation within oncology within AstraZeneca. I've been in industry for a long time, probably about 30 years or more, similar to Paul, and look forward to the discussion today.
Great, thanks for joining, Michael. I'd like to see if Martine is able to join. I know she had a bit of a screen freeze there for a second. Okay, so we'll give her a minute to join back. I think what we'll do is we'll continue. Oh, I think we're getting her back on screen here, so this is good. This is technology in action. So, Martine, thanks for making this work. If you wouldn't mind just an introduction of yourself, that'd be great.
Yeah, so apologies, everybody. Martin Zimmerman, I lost the connection. I tried that, this is like when you have a health authority meeting and you have connection. That's right. So Martin Zimmerman, I'm the head of regulatory and R&D at the rare disease business of AstraZeneca.
Great, thanks, Martine, for making this work. This is the world that we live in with technology.
Did you already ask?
Yeah. So I think what we'll do is we've got a couple of minutes to talk about this in further detail. The outcomes from that survey were very interesting, but definitely your experiences across your own individual organizations are really going to add value mostly. So I wanted to get some insights from each of you on your experiences with health authorities. And starting off, the impression from the external environment would be that if you're providing for a good package submissions to the health authority, you would presume that there would be no questions, but that's not really the case. What we're finding, in fact, is that questions do come up. It does create in some ways you perceive as a delay. So I was hoping that if you don't mind, maybe we can talk a bit about why does this happen? And Paul, if you wouldn't mind maybe taking a second to kick this off for us, that'd be great. And then we can kind of open it up.
Yeah, sure, Vlad. Thanks. I think questions are here and are here to stay. So there are several reasons for that. One is we give packages that are as complete as we believe regulatory authorities need to make decisions. And that doesn't necessarily mean that we give them everything we have or everything we know. So in the end, basically, as Martine came up with, that there are basically 3 buckets of questions. Those that we know we'll get, and we just need a little bit more time to prepare for them, but we're ready to answer. Then there are some questions that you could call administrative. I can't find something. I'm sure it's there, but I don't know where. Help me out here. And then there are some really clever questions that show that the health authority may have seen information from other sponsors that have triggered questions that we simply couldn't have been aware of. Does that help? Martine, do you want to add some?
Yeah, exactly. Thank you very much for stepping in. When we prepare a submission, what we ask the team and working with the team to go in depth data very well, right? So we anticipate the questions. I think the best team where you have a list of questions ready, the question come, you knew this could come, right? Now then they are the administrative here. We help them, and this is sometimes where you can have also with the FDA things, you guide them to explain how your submission is built. And then what questions, right? Those are the questions, the clever, those are the questions we didn't anticipate, and that's what I was saying, that the authorities know something from a competitor in the same indication, or a same mechanism of action company thing, and they want to know how our drug is behaving vis-a-vis this. So those are the list of questions. The best team is the one to answer to everything. I think we discussed between us, well familiar with 0 question submissions, right? We have 2 question submissions sometimes. But yeah, that was more what I wanted to experience.
Great. Any thoughts from your side, Michael, on this?
No, I think I would agree with both Paul and Martine's views. Is like, you know, you do need most teams or all teams will be anticipating the questions that they're likely to receive, and have those in as part of their regulatory defence, and will be generating those alongside the submission package, so that they're or even just after submission, just so that they're available to answer the questions when they come in, because it can be quite a it's quite a structured approach in some countries in terms of when you know you're going to get the questions, so it gives you a bit of time. Whereas others, it can be there can be a lag, or it can be quite quick before you start getting questions. So ideally, you know, being able to anticipate as many of those, as Martine says, ahead of time and have pre-prepared answers will always allow you to keep the process moving through the regulatory procedure.
Thanks. So, like I mentioned before, in terms of some of the learnings that we got out of this, there were certain areas where questions are happening more than others. And I think I touched on clinical, manufacturing, labeling, and safety. And I don't know, Paul, maybe if you want to kind of share your thoughts on this, why do you think that's happening?
Yeah, it doesn't surprise me at all that these are the topics that people report are the top scorers. So manufacturing, as we said, you try to get the right balance here of giving information, but obviously there's an awful lot of proprietary stuff in manufacturing, so you don't want to give them everything. So it typically provides a lot of questions, but for the most part, these are straightforward requests for just more data that we chose not to provide upfront. Give a couple more validation reports, some batch analyses, justify your starting material. They are typically in that bucket of we're ready to respond. Clinical studies, their results and the proposed labeling that are based on those data, that is way more open to interpretation. And while many of these questions can and should be anticipated with our reports being pre-baked, our responses being pre-baked, regulators often give them a unique twist that requires some additional thought and some tweaking of the prepared responses. And sometimes these responses are in that bucket of completely unexpected because the health authority knows more than we do. Examples are, was the study design optimal and was it executed optimally? I mean, hindsight is 2020. There's a lot you don't know when you set these up. Was the study population adequately representative of the population that you target in your label? Was the efficacy and the safety similar across subgroups, or was there a subgroup that the regulator may feel has a better benefit risk? So these questions can require some really deep strategy discussions in the team and escalation to leadership. And very often they start to spin because you do a set of analyses and that leads to more questions and you do more analyses. And so, Michael, Martine, what have you seen?
Yeah, I think very, very similar, I would say, Paul. And I think, you know, we've looked at a sample of submissions that we've done within AstraZeneca. Only a sample, it's not necessarily representative, but you know, the numbers of validation questions we receive are extremely low, which is, I guess, good in terms of that we're addressing requirements. But you know, there can be, you know, in terms of, you know, our first sort of request for supplemental information, there can be significant numbers of questions. But those generally tend to be resolved, such that by the second round in Europe anyway, we have much less questions coming through. But ideally, you know, we want to be able to resolve those, and the numbers of oral explanations that we get, because we essentially haven't been able to answer the questions, are extremely low. So it's obviously demonstrating a high efficacy in terms of, or a high precision in terms of the responses that are being provided by our teams. So that's what I would add. I don't know whether Martine, you want to add anything to it?
Yeah, I want to give the Japanese color, because sometimes in Japan you get question, right? I see Paul nodding. So I think it's they ask and they ask and they ask again. and we reply and we reply and we reply, right? And the analysis that they ask, we do not change the data, but I think sometimes they just continue to ask, having a little bit more explanation, and that's where the dialogue helps. And we have our Japanese to the regulators, because this is something that's easy to do there. Nothing repetition, and that's the number of questions in Japan because of repetition of questions, right? And again, you could feel it's the same question, but it's and you're like, okay. And sometimes there is team fatigue, if I can say so, having to answer what looks like the same question.
Yeah, I can corroborate that, if you like, from what we've done. It's like the small sample that I've looked at is, it's up to 11 rounds of questions teams are looking to address. How much of that is repeat questions, I can't answer, but I'm sure you're absolutely right, Martine, that there is bleed through of the questions. Yeah. Sorry.
And Michael, with that one, I think this is interesting. I mean, how do you improve the process then? I think Martine had suggested something about preparing in advance. There's some suggestion that your time to submit is limited. So obviously you can only do so much level of preparation to your actual dossier. And then you need to actually move forward, knowing that you might need to on the back end prepare for some of those anticipated questions, right? But what is your impression? I mean, how do you improve the process, or what actions have you seen to try and avoid this cycle that you're talking about?
Well, I guess, the more you can do to analyze the questions that you're, consistently receiving on applications, and look for trends to build those into your submissions proactively in the way that you want to be able to get those addressed and not receive questions from the authorities on those predefined questions is one approach. I guess, the other thing is, having access to questions across projects and being able to analyze across different projects is an opportunity that some companies are or have looked at. So certainly in AstraZeneca, we're looking at what are the opportunities. At the moment, each team maintained its own sort of register of the questions received, and those would be looked at in that team for the next submission that they're going to make. But I think there are opportunities to digitize here, which I'm sure we'll come on to be able to make this process a bit easier.
Yeah,
I can jump in. For example, currently or recently, we have received several. Okay, so this is a cross product. The pregnancy thing is coming. Second time, you scratch a bit your head and you say, "Oh, I've seen it before." So now this is for another submission. Let's get the pregnancy answer ready, right? Just in kind of things that cross the company, or just talking with so have you had this question, right? So I think that's where without it helps to be aware of the what I said, the flavor of the month or flavor of the year question, right?
Mm-hmm.
So in line with that, I think because Michael, you touched a bit on digital, and along with that, I don't know, I mean, what the experiences have been so far with that. Certainly you want to avoid that churn and the visibility that can help those future submissions and the teams that are involved in that. Paul, what's your perspective? I mean, have you seen anything that's been done to try and address this?
Yes, Vlad. I know these efforts can be huge, but because of multiple functions contributing and different time recording practices, in my companies, it's been really hard to capture the real cost of responding. One hurdle has been the fact that time recording in our companies has been at the project level, which is not granular enough, and in percent of the workday. That structurally underestimate the effort in a time when the teams work more than your typical 32 or 40-hour week. And as Michael mentioned, many organizations are looking at digital solutions to help respond to health authority questions. Demonstrating, because of the above, demonstrating the ROI can be a challenge. And in some ways, we're victims of our own success. We've always managed to get it done. Yeah. So as Michael said, companies or at team level have some database that captures the questions that have been asked. But for many, the data capture and searching is largely manual. It's a great start, but the manual nature just risks missing important information. So there clearly is value in having a systematic machine capture and processing of health authority and ethics committee questions and the responses to them. That sets you up to have machine interrogation of those data and when a new question comes in and help authoring of the responses. So that to Martina's point, you can be consistent in your responses to different health authorities and across your entire portfolio to individual health authorities. And you can preempt those questions about pregnancy, right? And that is really helpful. And ideally, obviously, you would want to have some structured content authoring that just drops the relevant data in the sections of the response without you having to search for it.
To add also, it's manual, but sometimes also things are sitting in, right? So, and you have people that have super, they see the thing and they can tell you, oh, I saw the same thing elsewhere. But sometimes people are not available or whatever, right? Or they left the company. So I think the computer or those things is critical for me, right?
So what do you recommend? I mean, Michael, I don't know if maybe you want to kind of help us out here a little bit. The idea that going to some digital initiative, Paul had mentioned things like structured content authoring. What do you recommend to organizations that are maybe new to this? How do they get started?
Well, I guess the thing really, from an AstraZeneca perspective, we're looking at this. We don't have the magic bullet to be very clear. But I guess you have to be able to find a way of digitizing, as Paul was saying. We get the questions coming from regulatory authorities in PDF or Word documents. We'll need to be able to break that down in terms of categorizing those questions and being able to cataloging them and the responses to them in a digital solution. Paul mentioned the structured content authoring, and that would be an ideal scenario where you could actually then have predictive analytics sitting on top of whatever solution you've got to be able to, as Paul was saying, auto suggest answers to questions. Because I think the whole thing here really is there's a huge amount of knowledge that's tied up in Excel spreadsheets in many companies. Certainly we have these, where being able to reuse the questions with oversight from the appropriate functions into to speed up those responses. When you're doing a rollout to multiple markets, etc., to being able to recycle those has got to be a real advantage to be able to start to some way demonstrating the return on investment. So I think it is really about that. There are some initial starts of solutions here, but I don't know whether maybe you even can add to this, Vlad, yourself. But certainly being able to consolidate and interrogate and catalog this information is going to be key.
Yeah, Michael, it was interesting. I think there's a number of interesting perspectives on this. Number one, Paul, you talked about the challenge of ROI. And I know in our discussions, even offline, there's been some evaluation of this from the survey itself as to where is the root of that challenge. And what I understand is there's so many different functions that might have to contribute into those question responses that you'd have to get the collective of those organizations to get to a perspective of what is the true effort associated with that can quantify the potential impact that this is having in today's environment, in the current state, right? That's one point of view. The second, I think, Michael, in line with what you're talking about as well, is the time from receipt of unstructured or semi-structured or embedded baked in data that's existing on PDFs and other documents. To digitize that, to get it into those Excels, is another level of value that can come out associated with that, I imagine. And then the third one I'm hearing is the analytics, the insights that can come from that, and driving that predictive nature to not only evaluate what are the trends associated with it, but then what can we expect and promote or even recommend for future submissions could be the last, I think, opportunity that exists. I'm going to pause because I said a lot. I don't know whether any of you have a perspective on what I've basically tried to package up there.
Yeah, and the beauty, once you have a system and a process to grab unstructured information and data, you can even go beyond your own questions and responses. You can push e-parse through that system. You can push FDA reviews through that system, and grab external knowledge as well.
Absolutely.
So now you're extending that to a complete regulatory intelligence solution that aggregates your health authority questions plus other sources of information combined, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Nirvana.
But
And there,
I think in the Vladimir, in the current we talk about where there is a constant flow of information.
yeah.
I think having that is not the nirvana. Is we need it, right? We need it now because, as I said earlier, very often the health authority know more than we know. Good, our Reg Intel group is right because health authorities, they are inside competitors. So this is much needed for me. Yeah.
Great. I know we're coming near to time here. We've got maybe a couple of minutes left. I see a question that's come in from the audience. Do you see an opportunity to even cross leverage across health authority questions that are coming in? Is that part of this process as well, to basically go from one market into the next, and that becomes a value statement also? I don't know if one of you want to take that up first. Michael, maybe if you want to consider from your perspective.
Well, I guess that is the opportunity is there as is described, because the data is the data that's going to the package. So you're just getting, as Paul was saying, you're getting different perspectives of on your own data. So absolutely, being able to utilize questions across health authorities is the opportunity itself, because you're then recycling, then you're reusing information that you've already prepared. So and maybe just tweaking it to address the nuance of the question you're getting.
Great. And another, sorry, Martin, please go ahead.
No, I was just say, yeah, definitely. Now, that's where I think we're not robots, right? And the nuance is important, right? That because what happens if you don't pay enough attention to the answer what you have, and then you get another round of questions, because indeed you this little difference in the answer, in the question, hence in the answer, right?
Mm-hmm.
And regulators talk with each other. We cannot afford to speak out of both sides of our mouth.
Yeah.
So that's that consistency, looking at how do you drive insights that can ensure the question in one market, you're leveraging that and you essentially repeat that response in some ways and repackage that for a secondary health authority. Mm-hmm. Right. Another question that's come in from the audience, I know we've got maybe a minute left, the lasting question here. There's a lot of organizations that are deploying RIM solutions, or regulatory information management systems. Obviously, technology is not new in this process area, but consolidating and collecting information into a RIM, in some ways you would expect that this might help solve the problem. I don't know if any one of you want to speak to that. Do you see that as the future, really, to leverage the best of what RIM can provide?
Well, I guess RIM is at the moment, is depending on which RIM we're talking about, but certainly that there are RIM solutions that where you can catalog the information from the PDF, as we talked about, into the RIM solution. But what you really need to be able to do is be able to have an intelligence layer on top of that, an analytics layer to be able to analyze those questions and to be able to do, as Paul was suggesting, something auto-suggestive. So I think it goes some way, but I think there's more that can be done to build additions to those to that capability, so that you can actually get to a point where the data and the information is digitized rather than just catalogued.
Great. I know this was a brief conversation.
Yeah, but again, to be valuable, and information goes into the extent of information that you put in the system will be of paramount importance. Have the power that it is supposed to have, right? Never underestimate the work with having a powerful RIM.
Great. Yeah. Thank you all for your time today. I know this was just a brief chat, an opportunity for us to talk a little bit about this as a point in time. Very much appreciate your time today, and I hope you have a great weekend. Thanks so much for your participation in the Digital Summit at Indegene. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye.